8 years before 1492, a 33-year-old sailor in Portugal looked at the world and had one very dangerous thought. Why bother going around the planet when we could just cut through it? His name was Christopher Columbus, and he was not trying to discover America. He wasn't even looking for a new world. He was chasing something much more practical, much more ambitious, and honestly very human. A shortcut. He wanted to turn the so-called Sea of Darkness into a highway. At the time, a faster route didn't mean just saving time. It meant faster money. It could change the whole structure of trade. And Columbus understood one thing very well. If he could reach Asia by sailing west, he wouldn't just become rich. He would become eternal. Columbus was a voracious reader. He studied maps, listened to stories, and collected every rumor about the oceans like a fucking schizophrenic conspiracy theorist. He had a plan. Sail west to reach the east. It was a brilliant idea. Unfortunately, he had just one tiny issue. He was terrible at math. The Greeks had already calculated the Earth's size more than 1,000 years earlier, and they were right. Portuguese experts had done the same. They knew the planet was huge. Columbus, however, decided the Earth was much smaller than it actually was. Something the size of his right ball. In his mind, Japan was basically a long weekend away from Spain. The experts told him he was retarded and he would fail. Columbus told them they lacked vision. Little did they know what was coming. For 7 years, Columbus followed the Spanish court like a man trying to convince a very busy kingdom that his idea was not crazy, just extremely ahead of its time. He was following the king around like a horny stray dog, humping his royal leg, begging him to fund his batshit plan while he was busy with actual important shit like wars, plagues, and deciding whose cousin to execute next. So Columbus had to wait. He kept pitching, kept insisting, kept showing maps, and kept selling the dream. And while he waited, Portugal kept moving. Portuguese explorers were rounding Africa, expanding trade routes, and proving that the world was full of opportunity for whoever was willing to move first. It is said that history is written by the winners, but in the real world it's stolen by the quickest. In January 1492, Granada fell. The war was over. The crown suddenly had something it did not have before, some breathing room. So Columbus made his move. But he did not ask for a small favor. He didn't ask for one ship and a nice certificate. He arrived with the confidence of a man who had already mentally lived through the success. He wanted ships, authority, titles, prostitutes, and a serious cut of the profits. He wanted 10% of all the wealth he found. He wanted to be admiral of the ocean sea. And on top of all that, he wanted his kids, his grandkids, and probably his fucking dog to inherit the whole scam forever. The king said no. Columbus left frustrated. But then the accountants showed up. And this is where history gets funny. Because sometimes the person who changes the world is not the loudest dreamer in the room, but the guy looking at the budget. Luis de Santancel, the crown's finance man, understood the logic instantly. Columbus's plan was a cheap bet. If he failed, the loss was tiny. If he succeeded, Spain won a route to Asia, wealth, prestige, and a direct place in the future. It was a high-risk bet with a low cost and a massive upside, steered by a man who didn't know how to do math. After talking to Luis de Santancel, the kings approved the plan. On the 3rd of August, 1492, in Palos de la Frontera, 3 ships were ready to sail: the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Niña. 90 horny men. Some came for glory. Other came for pay. Some came because history had a way of drafting people before they understood the terms. They were nervous, really nervous. The ocean was still full of rumors back then. People imagined strange creatures, endless drops, boiling waters, and the edge of the world. All the classic things humans invent when they have a map but no confidence. So to calm them down, Columbus did what every leader does when he senses panic. He spoke with extreme confidence and told the biggest lie they had ever heard. He kept 2 logs, one with the real distance and another with a shorter version to show the crew. That wasn't just lying, it was tactical morale management. The sailors kept their mouths shut tighter than a nun's asshole because nobody wanted to piss off the captain who was treating the entire Atlantic Ocean like his personal fucking parking lot. And so they sailed west into the unknown. 3 weeks after the departure, Columbus was heading toward a disaster according to his own numbers. If his math had been correct in the wrong way he believed it to be, they should have reached Asia long before they did. If the ocean really had been as small as his right ball, the expedition would have ended long before. But then something happened to lucky Columbus. The thing he did not know existed: a whole continent, a new world. A vast landmass that stood between Columbus and failure. He did not find the shortcut to Asia. He collided with an entirely new reality. On September 16th, the ocean began to change. The blue water gave way to a floating green world, the Sargasso Sea. To the sailors, it wasn't beautiful at first. It was strange and unsettling, like the ocean had suddenly started thinking in a different language. Seaweed drifted everywhere. It looked like a mix of diarrhea and puke. The ships pushed through a living carpet of motion. For the crew, this was the kind of thing that triggers imagination in the worst possible direction. But Columbus, that magnificent delusional bastard, looked at the same green mess and saw something completely different. He saw order. He saw a clue. He thought the grass meant the bottom was near. He was wrong, of course, but his mistake wasn't born from fear. By October 10th, morale was collapsing. The food was getting worse. The water was getting low. They hadn't washed their balls in weeks. The crew was tired of Columbus's delusional dreams. At this point, Columbus does not save the mission with law or force. He saves it with hope and greed. Because leaders know that people will endure almost anything if they believe something valuable is waiting at the end. Gold, spices, a new route, a new life, a new chapter in human history. Columbus looks at them and makes them a deal. "Give me just 3 days," he said. "If we do not see land in 72 hours, we turn around." That is not a normal decision. That is a high-stakes bet placed by a delusional man who has already bet everything else on the same table. As lucky as Columbus was, in the next few days, signs began to appear. A branch with berries, a carved stick, a green reed. The ocean was no longer empty. It was carrying messages. Then on October 11th, Columbus thinks he sees a light in the distance. It was a flickering glow, a signal, a promise. And then on October 12th at 2 o'clock in the morning, Rodrigo de Triana moans one single word. "Land," Rodrigo said. One word. That was everything the horny men wanted to hear. The silence broke. The crew erupted. Fear became joy. The men who were ready to mutiny were now crying, laughing, hugging, and dancing together. The long ocean crossing was over, and a new world had just entered the story. The next day at sunrise, paradise revealed itself. White sand, blue water, green hills, clear light. Columbus, the smug Italian bastard, stepped onto the beach dressed in his fanciest clothes, acting as if he were writing history. He penetrated the sand with the flag. He named the island San Salvador, not because the island asked for it, and not because the people there lacked their own name for it, but because boys love naming things when they realize they are important. After that, they stood there on that white sand with their mouths open like retards who just witnessed a magic trick for the first time. For the Taino people already living there, this was the opening of a new era, one of contact, exchange, and profound change. Columbus, as retarded as he was, called them Indians because he still believed he had reached Asia. The Taino people were peaceful, athletic, and curious. The Spaniards were fat, horny, and they were armed men, dressed in metal and very interested in where the gold and resources were. At first, both sides were trying to read each other. The Taino touched the swords. The Spanish noticed the ornaments. The Taino saw strange clothing, ships, horses, steel, and men who looked like they fell out of a different universe. The Spaniards could only see naked women. This is what first contact often looks like. Not instant understanding, but just people trying to make sense of the other side of reality. And for a moment, before the politics and power dynamics fully hardened, there was wonder, there was curiosity, there was the thrilling feeling that the world had just become bigger. 2 weeks later, the horny men continued the expedition to Cuba. Columbus kept searching for the signs of Asia he expected to find. Great cities, emperors, and markets of silk and gold. Instead, he found something else. He found farmers, fishing villages, food, new languages, and nice tobacco. The Europeans had never seen anything like it. The Spaniards watched, scratching their salty balls, while the Taínos exhaled the smoke slowly, not knowing those puffs would kickstart an entire industry. That very moment became history. A small local practice became a worldwide obsession. The world was now exchanging more than goods. It was exchanging habits, ideas, foods, names, and imagination. Columbus may not have found the route he wanted, but he had stumbled into something even larger than a trade lane, a connection between civilizations that had been separate for millennia. On Christmas Eve, the Santa Maria hit a reef. The flagship was damaged beyond repair and sinking faster than Columbus's reputation if the Queen ever found out. That should have been the end of the story. But Columbus improvised again. He used the wood to build a fort and named it La Navidad. That is one of the quiet superpowers of explorers, inventors, and builders. When the original plan dies, they salvage the material and continue. The timber of the ship became the bones of a settlement. He left 39 horny men on the land to establish the first European foothold, not because everything was under control, but because history often begins with a patch job. On January 16, 1493, they began the journey back to Spain. The Niña and the Pinta headed back north to find the winds that would take them home. But the Atlantic still had one more test. A winter storm rose like the ocean itself was not ready to let the story end. The ships were split apart. The weather was violent, the men terrified. Columbus, however, did what great risk-takers always do when the world gets ugly. He stuck his hand to his balls to keep the idea alive. He wrote down the discovery, sealed it in a barrel, and threw it into the sea. A message to the future, a backup copy of destiny, a way of saying, even if I do not make it, this story matters. It was a sign of the significance of the event. 6 weeks later, being the lucky idiot he was, he survived. He reached the Azores, then Portugal, then Spain, and now he was no longer just a sailor with a plan. He was the man who came back dick in hand from the other side of the world. When Columbus arrived in Lisbon, something awkward happened. He was standing in the kingdom that had spent years building the routes he had not followed, and Columbus had to deliver the news. He met King John II of Portugal and told him about the New World. Portugal knew something big had just been discovered, and they couldn't just look away. Spain had a new asset, and now Portugal had a new rival. The race to the ocean now became a race for the future. In March 1493, Columbus reached Spain. The bells rang. The court received him. The man who had left under doubt now returned like a conqueror. He brought parrots, unfamiliar plants, strange goods, and living proof that the world was much bigger than Europe thought. This matters because humans are not changed by arguments alone. They are usually changed by examples, by evidence, and by visible proof that reality is larger than the old system. Soon, Columbus was no longer just a sailor. He became a sex symbol. He was the walking, talking, weather-beaten argument that the ocean could be crossed. 4 weeks later, Columbus gives the great pitch of his life. This was not just a report. It was a sequel announcement. He described the lands he had seen, the people, the beauty, and the promise of trade. He sold a dream of connection, a bridge between worlds, and a new oceanic age. And the crown listened. They saw it as a new opportunity, where Spain could finally plant its flag into every continent and call it spreading civilization. The kings funded the next round. More ships, more horny men, more sexual ambition. The age of exploration was no longer a theory, it was a program. The second expedition was not a tiny follow-up. It was a full-scale operation. 17 ships, over 1,000 bastards crammed inside them like sardines with swords. Soldiers, priests, sailors, builders, officials, and dreamers packed into a floating machine of ambition. This was not just let us see what happens. This was, we are absolutely going back, and this time we are going to fuck everything we see. Columbus, the guy who used to beg for scraps, kiss royal asses, and get laughed out of every court in Europe, now had everyone in line ready to kiss the dirt he walked on. But there was one problem. This time the mood was different. The first voyage had been wonder. The second voyage was expectation. And expectation is dangerous because once people think a miracle is repeatable, they start asking for results. When the fleet arrived again, the first major task was obvious: build something permanent. So Columbus ordered the creation of La Isabela. That is how empires behave when the map starts becoming useful. A discovery is nice, a settlement is better. One of the earliest European towns in the Americas, with a full-blown brothel for the boys to fuck around. The problem came when the dream arrived faster than the logistics. The location was tough, the climate was rough, supplies were not endless, and expectations were enormous. The location was a real place with real people, real ecosystems, and real limits. La Isabela was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful new chapter, but instead it became a stress test. The Taino had already met the Spaniards once. This time the contact was deeper, heavier, and far more sexual. There were gifts, exchanges, negotiations, curiosity, misunderstandings, and growing strain. Some encounters were peaceful, but a lot of them were violent. The Spaniards came with steel, ships, horses, faith, ambition, and a system that did not yet know how to coexist gently with what it encountered. The Taino came with their own world, their own societies, their own sense of order, and their own understanding of the land. Both sides were trying to interpret each other, but they were not working with the same dictionary. That was the hidden tragedy of first contact. 2 years after the second trip, Columbus stopped being just the romantic explorer and started becoming something different. An organizer, a manager, and a governor of impossible expectations. And not every explorer is built for that job. Sailing across the Atlantic is one kind of genius, but running a colony is another. It requires patience, diplomacy, labor management, food logistics, and a level of emotional steadiness that heroic legends usually skip over, because spreadsheets and diarrhea management are not exactly cinematic as fuck. Columbus still had the vision. He still had that unshakable confidence, strutting around like his dick was the compass to Asia. He still believed he was on the edge of Asia, but now he also had to deal with shortages, disagreements, and the endless frustration of trying to create order in a place that was not designed to support his plans. This is where history becomes very human. The myth says great man, great discovery, but the reality is he had to deal with tools, weather, and hunger, while he had 10 different assholes yelling at him every 5 minutes about what the actual plan was. Eventually, Columbus returned to Spain, carrying more experience, more claims, more proof, and more complications. By then, Columbus had become a symbol of Spanish ambition and imperial possibility. Columbus had helped begin something much larger than just his own dick and ambition for sex. He helped to begin the age of sexual colonization. And like most people who start enormous things, he would spend the rest of his life trying to wrestle between his own thoughts and the magnitude of the thing he had created.